I realize that by titling today's devotional "Take This Job and Shove It," some of you may be anticipating, now this is his last rant, he's going to leave his church or whatever. But that is not true. I'm actually referring to an old country song that if you're too young to remember it, you'll definitely want to go back and listen to it. But it was ironically by the country musician Johnny Paycheck. And I don't know how Johnny got his paycheck after he said, "Take this job and shove it." But there's a heartbreak story in there as well. Of course, it's a country song. But anyway, I've been reading a lot of articles lately about how the pandemic has either forced people or allowed people to contemplate what they want out of life. A lot of people have said, "Take this job and shove it." Right? There's a lot of jobs available. And that's part of the reason, the supply chain and all the stories that go along with that. But people aren't going back to work because they enjoyed working from home or they want better hours or conditions, and this pandemic has given them an opportunity that they may not have had before. And you can almost have your choice of jobs and pay at this point. But there's a lot of other stories that are part of that. I read recently in the New York Times that in a survey just this fall of Gen Z job candidates, and I can't remember who Gen Z is. I'm Gen X, so maybe it's the ones that are right after me, before millennials or after millennials, somewhere in there. Anyway, but as many as 2/3 of Gen Z job candidates wanted jobs that would indefinitely stay remote, meaning they want to work from home or be somewhere else. And for whatever reason, and I can think of a number of reasons, people found that they liked working from home, whether it was being with your kids or the job flexibility or whatever it was. Anyway, talk about some more about that today. Today is Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021, and this is today's Word for the World. Good morning. I ran across another anonymous viewer this past Sunday and met her, and I won't mention her name, but anyway, I know that there are those of you out there who watch these and never like, comment, post, or share, so I'd encourage you to do that. Anyway, I'm not going to be posting this Thursday. Got an incredibly busy scheduled day, probably one of the most busy I can ever remember. So I just want to let you know and give you a heads up on that. I will not be able to do this on Thursday, but I plan to be back next Tuesday. But as always, I know you look forward to a couple jokes. I got 3 for you today. And I also was just notified this morning that I have now been admitted into a bad dad jokes group where they put those jokes out. So maybe a whole new world opening up for us here soon. But what do you get when you put a candle in a suit of armor? A night light. Knight with a K, as in a knight that wears a suit of armor, right? Good stuff. See, that's just the stuff. That's why I need to be almost leading these groups. Anyway, this is one of my favorites. Maybe you tried this on Halloween. Every once in a while, I go outside and run the vacuum cleaner over the driveway just to ensure that the neighbors never talk to me. Right? And headed back towards our theme for the day, a boss stormed up to his employee as he shows up for work and says, "You missed work yesterday, didn't you?" And the employee replies, "Well, I wouldn't say I missed it." We all feel like that at times, don't we? Back to our story about the jobs and things like that. I guess I would have to call this may be some good news about the pandemic, right? People are reevaluating their lives, the things that they value. We realize that healthcare workers and teachers and a lot of employees were extremely stressed and still are stressed out at work, pressured in their jobs, and some are taking the opportunities to see what else is out there and see if this is really what they want to do. I read a couple articles on NPR. And I couldn't believe this statistic, more than 25 million people, and I believe this is in the United States, quit their jobs in the first 7 months of this year. Now, for a reference, there's only about 350, I think I'm right on this, 350 million people in the United States right now, and 25 million of them quit their jobs the first 7 months of this year. And possibly even more shocking is that in the month of August alone, 2.9% of the workforce quit. So there's an amazing, whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but there's an amazing thing going on right now. And of course, there's different reasons people quit: poor work conditions or wages. But some, as we've talked about before, just simply wanted to try out something new, and the opportunity was there. Maybe discover something they were passionate about, or maybe they just discovered that what they were pursuing was what they did not want out of life. I saw a scientific study that said, and it went back into history and looked at those who had lived through the Great Depression and answered the question, were they less likely to invest in Wall Street? And the answer was yes. And then there was a couple other historical things. But there was a research paper done that said that our experiences almost literally rewire our brains. And part of that job shifting that we're seeing going on now is part of that rewiring. And then it gets much more in depth than that. But I want to talk about that today because most of us will acknowledge that we now view the world very differently than we did before March 2020. Our brains are being rewired. We are processing this pandemic through jobs, through politics, through medicine, through all those sorts of things, and our brains are being rewired to how we interact, to what we believe, and things like that. The pandemic's been affecting choices that we make about the future and our attitudes toward it. What will we invest in? How much do we trust the government? And what I want to talk about today, what do we value the most? When we ask the question, what do we value the most, aside from people working from home, which clearly is a value to many people, I can tell you as a pastor who has spoken to many other pastors that people did not rush into church. So you might wonder, is that something that they really value? Most pastors will tell you that church attendance has suffered greatly. And people have now been, I think, frankly, rewired to not attend church. When we started streaming services, it became really easy to just stay home, and I get that. I understand that. So I do want to do this. I want to encourage you or challenge you about that today. If that's you, and you just haven't come back to church, you've been rewired, but you've been meaning to, every Sunday that you decide not to because it's easier, and whatever day, whether it's Sunday or not, whether you go to church on Sunday, Saturday, whatever it may be, every day that you don't go, it'll be easier to stay home. And you probably already know that. But for those of you who have returned to church, you know how valuable it is to you. You missed the relationships, the fellowship, the community, the worship together, just the togetherness, the support that the church provides. And there are some, and this is probably more likely my personal congregation, many who have wanted to go back but haven't been able to, either for health reasons or age or whatever. You would probably be the best one to speak to the issue today, and would be the ones we should be hearing from if you've wanted to go back but haven't been able to. You probably more than anyone could tell us the value of being back in church. And for those of you who have been rewired and you haven't gone back, let me say this, there's no better time than the holidays, right? We're coming up to Thanksgiving and Christmas. No better time than that to get back in the habit of going to church. And don't miss out on the gathering and the blessing of God's people and remembering why you went in the first place. So I'll just close with our verse from Hebrews today that has been often quoted since the time this pandemic started, and there was the debate about whether churches should close or stay open, whatever it was. Hebrews chapter 10, this is from the NIV, says, "Let us hold unswervingly," which is a word that you probably will never ever use anywhere else, but hold fast, hold strong to that. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And I would say that to challenge you about this way this morning. God has been faithful to you, regardless of what your brain rewiring and what's going on in our culture and our society and all those sorts of things. Verse 24, probably the main reason I would say you need to think about returning to church. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Verse 25, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And you see the author of the Hebrews, the theme there is spurring one another on toward love and good deeds and encouraging one another. But I also found it interesting that he or she, whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, the comment was, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. So even in the times that this is being written, that was a common thing for people to give that up. So I hope that'll be a challenge to you today. Maybe you just needed to hear from a pastor that say, hey, we need you at church. We miss you. We love you. We want you to come back. We want you to be a part of what's going on in the local body. And your church people probably miss you as well. So hopefully that will encourage you today. Let me have a word of prayer for us. Father, thank you for just the many blessings that we've talked about today that the church body creates, the hope of a bright future, the encouragement, the challenge that comes with us gathering together, and just the joy of celebrating worship and celebrating our faith and trust in you. I pray if there's someone out there today who just hasn't gone back, that you would challenge them today and move them. Maybe it's time that they move to a new church. I don't want to speak for churches trying to to fish in other ponds, Lord, but you know what place you have for people at what times, and we just pray that you move your church in the way you need it to move, and bringing different people with different gifts and skills into where you need them to be. Use us today to encourage each other, even though it may not be a day of worship, a day of gathering together. Speak to us through your Spirit, and may we encourage each other. Thank you for this time spent this morning, and may we be a blessing to you. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, well, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, which probably I should research for one of these someday and give us the origin of that phrase. If I don't take this job and shove it between now and then, and Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back next week, and I'll see you then. Have a great day.